I'm Kira Phillips. Breaking news out of Minneapolis. The jury has reached a verdict in the federal trial of those three former police officers accused of violating George Floyd's civil rights. The jury has found all three men guilty of violating Floyd's rights by not providing medical aid and failing to stop their senior officer, Derek Chauvin, from using excessive force. For more on this, I want to bring in ABC's Alex Perez on the phone in St. Paul. Also, former homicide prosecutor and defense attorney Bernarda Villalona for more. Bernarda, let's start with you. Are you surprised by the verdict?
I'm not surprised by the verdict because it was plain for all of us to see that you didn't need training, police training, to determine that George Floyd was crying out and was an immediate necessity of some kind of medical attention. So I'm not surprised. I'm glad that the jury arrived to the right verdict. They now have called these three former Minnesota police officers guilty because they are guilty for depriving the rights of George Floyd.
Alex, you have covered this case top to bottom for a year and a half now. What does a verdict like this mean for the Floyd family and also the people of Minneapolis?
Well, you know, Kira, the Floyd family has, of course, been following every single legal step very, very carefully. And this is what they wanted. They wanted to see a jury return a guilty verdict. Now, I want to dive in a little bit into what we're seeing happen. This jury made this decision in about 13 hours. They deliberated for about 13 hours. Testimony went for almost a month. So this decision came relatively quickly, Kira, and they had some complicated instructions before them. The jury instructions were about 38 pages, so they had a lot of things to go through here. And many thought the prosecutor really kind of faced an uphill battle here with these civil rights charges because she had to prove that these officers willfully chose their actions. But while some thought it was an uphill battle, it seems the jury agreed with the prosecutor here. Now, just a quick reminder, we're talking about those other officers who were on the scene when George Floyd was murdered, and that's Officer Tou Thao. He's the one that was seen sort of corralling the crowd, keeping them away from George Floyd and the other officers. And then the two former officers, J. Alexander King and Thomas Lane, those are the two former officers seen sort of at George Floyd's legs and back. Now, all three were charged with failing to help George Floyd when he needed medical help, and King and Thao were charged with failing to stop Chauvin. Now, what we saw in this case, Kira, all three of them took the witness stand in their own defense, and all three of them squarely pointed the finger at Chauvin, saying he took over the scene, and they weren't aware of how serious the situation was when it came to George Floyd and his life. But clearly the jury here, Kira, not buying that argument, finding them guilty on all charges against them, federal charges here, Kira.
Clearly, Bernarda, prosecutors did a great job arguing that the officers had every opportunity to stop and help.
Exactly, Kara. You got to think this is not a situation that just lasted a couple of seconds. We're not talking about a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes. We are talking about 9 minutes and 29 seconds where Derek Chauvin was on the neck of George Floyd with people in the crowd crying and screaming for help, for the officers to do something. How many times did we hear the bystanders say, Tou Thao, you're not going to do anything? You're not going to do anything? He's not breathing. He's not moving. And that put all of those officers on notice about the desperate need of medical attention that George Floyd needed, and also a reason to stop Derek Chauvin from taking away the life of George Floyd.
Bernarda, Alex, thank you both.